Energy cannot be created nor destroyed. It can only be changed from one form to another. Albert Einstein said that. Karma is a cosmic law in Sanatan, or Hinduism, Buddhism, and Jainism primarily. It's based on the law of cause and effect. The word karma comes from the Sanskrit root karman, which means action. This is why the term karma can suitably be translated as action and consequence. So understanding this, karma doesn't indicate what is right or wrong. It's not a law based on morality, in other words. The Buddha taught that there are only three qualities that the universe has that are eternal. They are karma, which is what perpetuates the wheel of samsara. There is nirvana, the cessation of karma. And lastly, space. This refers to the emptiness, the infinite. Karma is simply the law in nature that manages energy. So it can also be referred to as the law of exchange. Everything that exists in the universe requires energy to sustain itself. That's why the great inventor and physicist Nikola Tesla said, "If you wish to understand the secrets of the universe, think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration." That is, of course, the reason why we are all able to live and sustain ourselves. Because we regularly take in the energy we need to survive, primarily from food and water. But even the most effortless, small, or subtle functions we carry out on a daily basis, like thinking, or imagining, or feeling things emotionally, all of this expends energy, expends calories. When we engage in these things, for this reason, every thought and action, regardless of how significant it may seem, or rather how insignificant it may seem, is an exchange of energy. And all energy exchanges produce consequences. There's no exception to this. In fact, because of something called quantum entanglement theory, which began in the modern era, so the early 1900s, we now actually have a way of understanding and explaining how all thoughts, actions, events, and things are recorded in the universe and can be found within the quantum field matrix and traced back to its origin. This relates to interdependence in Buddhism, the entanglement of all things. These things can be, anything can be traced back from the Big Bang and beyond. This field matrix or library of information in Hinduism is known as the Akash. Many people call it the Akashic records. Everything that exists leaves an energetic imprint whose chain of causality and dependent origination can be browsed and traced through the quantum field. And we explain this through quantum field theory. We, as Gnostics and Buddhists and spiritual people, we utilize meditation to investigate this sort of thing. Wrong action produces unwanted karma, which results in all the negative consequences and inconveniences we receive in life. Wrong action produces unwanted karma, which results in all the negative consequences and inconveniences we receive in life. And in the context of karma, in this context, the word dharma is sometimes used to refer to good karma. This is experienced as all the beneficial results and all the convenient things, the conveniences we receive when we perform good deeds. There are 4 primary types of karma. One kind is a primordial type of karma that originates from the type of existence and lessons that the monad decides for the soul to have before the soul enters into evolution. Yeah, the monad or the being, it's the same thing. It's the oversoul. It manages many soul shards, like us, many essences. Now, the next kind of karma is fate karma, or past life karma. This kind of karma is based on the quality of mind that the soul has accumulated from all their previous lives, including their present life. And it determines the quality and conditions for the next incarnation as well. So a soul with fate karma can live a sedentary life and not produce any significant daily karma, and yet still carry great debts from previous lives that must inevitably be paid. Daily karma is the karma that we accrue from actions that we take on a daily basis. The actions of this nature are generally not consistent or repetitive enough over the long term to create significant increases in the ego. So as a result, most daily karma can be paid within days, weeks, or months. Lastly, there is the law of accidents. This is the possibility that significant events and accidents can occur on occasion without substantial causality, merely because of the diverse activities in an environment that has so many things going on, so many people, and so many probabilities. When you live in a big city, for example, a lot of things can happen. A lot of problems can happen at any moment. You could be walking down the street and struck by a car or a bus. You can get lost easily. You can lose your transit ticket or find yourself in rush hour and late for work. So much of these things are not really karmic. They just are inevitable to happen. They are just happening because of the carelessness of somebody or somebody else's carelessness. And karma has a mechanical aspect to it too, which can be found in physics. But we should never limit our understanding of karma to a strict, inflexible mechanical law, because karma is it's a broad function. It's managed by different intelligences. It's also an intelligent, conscious law. It's managed by very elevated beings, Buddhas. So as such, karma is flexible and it's negotiable too. Now there is an exception. The actions related to sex are non-negotiable. Karma caused by sex can be paid in different ways, but it cannot be avoided entirely. Since karma is a conscious law, superior laws override inferior laws. I was in a dream, and at one point I began to receive an insight from my intuition. My Divine Mother narrated to me, "Evil always has the last say." As I began to see these dark entities, these very terrifying, large, kind of humanoid beings materialize in front of me so that they could carry out a negotiation with the superior beings that were already here in my vicinity. And when I woke up from that vision, I thought about why it's the case that evil has the last say in karmic judgments. In this case, by last say, I mean not in a good way of having the most authority, but having the last say. I mean, not having as much control in the situation, as much authority. And so if you think about it, any creature that has ego carries their own subjective, unreliable, and false ways of perceiving the world. It's always like that. As soon as there's any slight amount of ego mixed with consciousness, or that consciousness is being filtered by, perception is all of a sudden specified and narrowed, and it's made subjective. It's altered. This makes perfect sense that souls with ego, who are devoid of a conscience, should never take priority over judging with the law, because karma is a perfect and conscious law. And the beings with ego are not perfect. They're conditioned. Actions of any kind cannot be taken back or ignored. However, superior actions can pay for outstanding karma, so that the consequences become reduced or voided. The lords of karma take into consideration many things when it comes to judging souls. According to the law, a person can be rewarded sometimes for simply putting effort into a task or deed, but generally it's their results that are multiplied when their deed makes an outward impact on the lives of other beings. So for example, if you write a self-help book, but it never gets published, your book will have very little karmic impact. Intention and level of cognizance is another thing the lords of karma consider. Many of us have heard the line in the Bible where Jesus says, "Forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do." This is something that happens during karmic judgments. The severity of karma from a thought or action can vary slightly, depending on whether the person had bad intentions or good ones. The severity of karma will vary even more depending on whether the person did something in a habitual way or a mechanical way. In other words, in a state of psychological sleep or in a state of psychological awareness, cognizance, in which they did something deliberately. This is the case with magicians, both from, in the past, traditional magicians, and people who are working with magic these days, who are learning to awaken consciousness and are doing things to manifest things deliberately. This is similar to a bank robber who needs to stay sharp and alert and fully aware of what he's doing. Another thing to be aware of is the level of dimension in which we perform an action. So we live here in the physical world and body, and that's our primary domain for now. And most of us are completely accustomed to physicality. So for us, generally speaking, actions that are taken in the physical world have the most effect and consequence than those taken in more subtle dimensions, like the astral plane. However, it shouldn't be taken lightly, the things that we do in the astral plane, because there are beings there that we can affect. And in other words, in the astral plane, in other words, being where we engage in when we think and feel and dream. Emotions are astral, thoughts are mental, but the general term is astral plane. Regarding the negotiability of karma and its relationship with fate or destiny, this is what Master Samael had once explained. Karma is the law of compensation, not of vengeance. I'm quoting here. There are some who confuse this law with detriment and even fatalism, believing that everything that happens to the human being in life is inexorably determined beforehand. It is true that the acts of the human being are determined by inheritance, education, and the environment. But it is also true that the human being has free will and can modify his actions to educate his character, to form superior habits, to fight against weaknesses, to fortify virtues, etc. Invariance is another characteristic of karma that expresses itself in Newton's third law of physics, action and reaction. Newton's third law states that for every action or force in nature, there is an equal but opposite reaction. For example, if object A exerts force on object B also exerts an equal but opposite force on object A. The most simple examples of invariance include dropping a ball onto the ground and watching it bounce up and down until it reaches a state of equilibrium. Another simple example is the recoil of a firearm, such as a rifle. We also witness invariance when we drop a pebble into a body of water and create waves that move up and down. But a more elaborate and interesting phenomenon of karma is the law that demonstrates that the consequence of an action is always greater than the initial action. Just one push of a domino from the beginning of the line will make the entire lineup fall down. Or let us take the pebble in the water example again. When we throw a rock or pebble into a still body of water, we see the initial plunge of the rock into the water. We see the water dip down where the pebble landed. And then we see the water splash up again and continue to create waves that propagate outward. This cycle of invariance between waves continues to repeat until the energy in the water subsides. And furthermore, the waves can also create ripples that span across the entire pond or lake. And in spite of those ripples being weaker than the initial waves, they can still affect a very broad area within which the surrounding animals can sense. Now, just like all mechanisms and processes in nature, reincarnation, or more specifically return or recurrence, is a byproduct of karma. When we die, our soul goes through the process of death and rebirth, and the circumstances of our next life are determined by our karma. I mean, by specifically the karma we accrued in this life and previous lives. The necessity to return is due to unresolved karma, which is collected in the mind as energy that is still in motion in the ego. The ego contains karma. This is our subconsciousness. It contains conditions and causes that are still at play. This is the part of our mind that belongs to the wheel of samsara. Now back to invariance. If we remember that for every action or force in nature, there is an equal but opposite reaction, then the same rule applies to reincarnation. This is why, typically, when we reincarnate or return, the roles and circumstances between soulmates invert or switch. So typical relationship dynamics such as boyfriend and girlfriend, or parent and child, or uncle and nephew take turns alternating in each life. Sometimes the roles remain similar, but just have slight variations, such as someone who was once a business mentor, but is now your uncle. Another law of physics that karma expresses itself through is Newton's second law of thermodynamics, which explains the universal experience of heat and energy interconversions. This law states that heat always moves away from warm objects and toward colder objects. So in order to reverse the direction of heat flow, you must exert energy, more energy rather, to do so. This is why there is also another law in physics called entropy. This is nature's tendency to behave disorderly and randomly in various systems and natural elements. This phenomenon is commonly explained by comparing states of matter like solids, liquids, or gas. In the case of states of matter, the formation of water molecules into ice, for example, requires more energy output and order than the formation of liquid or gas. So a simple way of putting it is that it's easier for any object or creature to move downhill than it is to move uphill. The reason this is important for us is because evolution works in the same way. The way we use energy on a regular basis determines the quality of our life in the future. Are we just using up whatever energy we have every day and spending it on useless activities? Or are we living efficiently and constantly looking to gather and conserve energy so that we can put all of our effort into useful activities that benefit others? This is a quote from Chicago Gnosis, one of the speakers. She says, "Trauma, as I mentioned before, is just a really powerful experience of gnosis that prevents us from denying suffering. But other experiences, good experiences, can have that same kind of transformed or undigested impressions, that same effect on our structure of our psyche. And even though the physical body doesn't carry on from lifetime to lifetime, what we call the astral body, which is made up of our emotions, or the mental body, which is made up of our mental substances and thoughts, mental vibrations, carry on from lifetime to lifetime in the form of the ego. These are lunar-controlled phantom bodies. They're governed by the moon. Right? Unless you have solar bodies in which you practice the superior sexual act, the tantra, in order to utilize the energy of the sun, we all have solar bodies. We are under the influence of the moon. I just added that right there, that couple sentences there. That's a tip of information. But continuing on, so that's why I say it's a type of knowledge or gnosis that cannot be denied, no matter how much our rational minds try to deny it and say, this didn't happen to me, it wasn't a big deal, I think I'm misremembering, it shouldn't affect me too much. The reality is it's better for us to see it as a chance to wake up. So in many ways, trauma can be a wake-up call, a chance for us to say, there's something in my life that is fundamentally wrong. Wrong for me and wrong for my happiness. This suffering needs to be changed. I can't go on like this. And so these experiences, traumas, are a chance for us to explore, to look in ourselves and to look outside, to seek answers, to try to find a way to change. And for many people, they seek more existential routes to solve their problems. They seek to find a deep answer for why people have to suffer these horrible things like rape, sexual abuse, child abuse, and even things like divorce and betrayals and high school breakups. They can still be so enormously painful, emotionally overwhelming, etc., and so on. On one hand, trauma presents us with an opportunity to radically change our lives. But for many people, it's very difficult to find answers in things that really work to make a change in their life, to really address their suffering. And in those cases, because they don't have an intrinsic, integral way of healing, like meditation, which is essentially the right way to heal, it's how you reach enlightenment, trauma often becomes more of a burden for people without spirituality, more of an obstacle. It gets worse over time. It pushes us deeper into suffering, where we have problems with addiction, or as a parent, it's the parent's problem with addiction, and when we were a child, and now it's caused us to struggle with that. So now that's generational trauma. I'm trying to find my notes here. As an example, yeah. So karma provides us with the opportunity to see ourselves in a way to wake up to our suffering and change, and ask, what did I do to produce this? Maybe not in this lifetime, but in previous lifetimes. And what can I do to change it if I awaken my consciousness and respond in a higher conscious way? And it comes with the risk of getting more identified with that intense pain and going deeper and deeper and just suffering, brooding, and just marinating in it. But Samael concludes with quite a bit of severity. He says, I quote, "Disgracefully, instead of bowing with reverence before the eternal living God within each one of us, people protest, blaspheme, they justify themselves, they stubbornly excuse themselves and wash their hands like Pilate. Karma is not modified with such protests. On the contrary, it becomes harder and more severe no matter how we might resist karma or be mad about our situation or say, well, I was a good person and I didn't deserve this. And why is this happening? And yell at our inner God. It won't change cause and effect." The quote actually ended a couple sentences ago. So now I'm continuing Chicago Gnosis. It's not going to change the energies in nature that are coming to manifest. For us, we will reap what we sow. If we do good deeds that produce harmony in our environment, that produce happiness in other people, they will respond to us with that happiness. Now, attachment theory, for those who are unfamiliar, is it's a scenario in which if we have stable attachment, a healthy, safe environment in which we grow up, we experience relationships in a different way, much more easily able to have healthy relationships later on in life. If we have unhealthy or unstable, dysfunctional relationships or families that we're in, or an environment as a child, it changes the way our brain is wired, the neural pathways. We have a lot more anxiety and fear and withdrawal in relationships later in life. So the formative years, not just for attachment, but for all kinds of things in our personality, have a tremendous effect on us. And science has shown us this. How much of those formative years is causing the problems we have now in life versus past lives. There was a student that asked a question about this, and they suggested how this works. The answer is yes, you kind of... the student answered the question as they were asking, essentially. The formative years are the compressed aggregate of many previous lives. The formative years is where we see not just lifetimes, like the past 10 lifetimes, but almost all the way back to the beginning of the human lifespan, so very ancient times. Lifetimes that go back to previous civilizations, things that happened not just as an individual, but as a collective, are also encoded into even the way that a fetus forms in us. If you've ever looked at a human fetus, you know it goes through phases of evolution, almost looking like a lizard at certain points and then becoming more human. All of our biology, our DNA, our physical existence is a code based on our spiritual experience. It is the physical manifestation of the internal existence. So when we see early childhood traumas and pain like that, it's often from an ancient past of being caught up in a cycle with that person's family, or those other souls or individuals that are in the family that family who's been harming each other for a long time. That's very sad that it continues on for so long, lifetime after lifetime, and takes so long to dissipate that energy. So that's it for this presentation of karma, with the inclusion of karmic traumas. Any questions?